Greetings, everyone. I am your headmaster, and I welcome you to this most noteworthy and memorable entrance ceremony. Today marks the first day of your new school life, where you will renounce your connections to the outside world and live communally within the confines of these walls. Of course, if you want to escape, there is a special clause that you can follow. And that's to listen to some awful writing tips on writing our very own FANGAN. So gather round, students, and pay close attention, as your headmaster has plenty of murderous wisdom to share with you all. Now, for the uninitiated, FANGAN, or FANGANRONPA, is a term derived from Danganronpa, a series of visual novels from Weeaboo Land, or as the outside world calls it, Japan. It's a murder mystery series based around the idea of a group of people trapped in a closed environment by a mysterious mastermind, who's out to encourage them all to murder each other through an ever-escalating series of motives. Now, while this sounds like it could easily devolve into a Technicolor version of Battle Royale, the masterminds of these games demand a bit more subtlety. For the murders, at least. As such, someone out to kill must also hide the evidence as best as possible. Then a class trial will be held to determine the identity of the culprit, also called the Blackened. If the Blackened is identified, they'll be executed, and everyone can return to their life in confinement. The catch is that if the Blackened manages to get away with their crime, then they get to leave while everyone else will be executed instead. Of course, the games are also stuffed to the brim with fantastic characterization, comedy, tragedy, intrigue, non-linear storytelling, excellent music, and bathhouse scenes. So many bathhouse scenes. Fun for the whole family. The series has proven so popular that it's inspired countless creators across the world to write their very own fan versions, hence FANGANRONPA. What better way to spend our time trapped here? So strap yourself in for the majesty of this motive, because it's time to put together our very own FANGAN. Now, one of the benefits of FANGANs, and fanfiction in general, is its ability to explore concepts further than canon was ever able to or willing to. For example, new Danganronpa V3 also explored the concept of truths and lies, in both the conflict between the two and how they can be connected to hope and despair as well. It's these core ideological thematic conflicts that often form the basis of the story and tone for FANGAN, and will often in turn shape what sorts of conflicts the characters will face. But that's really hard to do. So the best approach is to simply transplant the exact same ideas as the core games into our own. While we may need to file off the serial numbers here and there, it's important not to deviate from the general vibe. Any aspiring FANGAN writer can simply copy everything from the base games, from character archetypes all the way to just setting the game in the exact same school for whatever reason. But don't worry, nobody will notice or care, because the thematic conflicts aren't what the audiences are here for. No, we know what they're here for. The deaths! A writer should focus the majority of their creative energy on the brutal means by which the characters will be stabbing, strangling, bludgeoning, crushing, hacking, drowning, and igniting each other, as well as the soundtracks for the many upscale torture devices they'll be making into executions. In addition, while the canon series may never take itself too seriously, with its neon pink blood and goofy sound effects, FANGAN writers should feel free to indulge in as much family-unfriendly violence and death as possible. Why explore someone's backstory and motivations when we can instead explore the mess that used to be the contents of their chest cavity as it splattered across the floor? Wait a second, are we forgetting something here? Oh, right. We can't have murders without a core cast of characters. Danganronpa's biggest strength has always been its large and diverse casts, their interactions and dynamics, and how they grow and change throughout the story. In addition, one of the most interesting qualities about them is the fact that they're nearly all elites in their field, referred to as super high school level students, or ultimates. These are students whose talents were recognized by the school and were invited to excel even further in that field, only for said field to become a mass grave once the game begins. Of course, designing a huge cast is also really hard, but we've got some easy shortcuts. See, a benefit of having ultimate titles is that they can help you decide exactly what sort of characters you're dealing with, because talents and gimmicks are exactly the same things as personalities, right? Mix them with some recurring archetypes and you're good to go. Never should a writer consider that a character's title might have nothing to do with their personality, be at odds with their actual goals in life, that it carries some kind of emotional baggage, or that they just aren't interested in the concept. This will help keep our workload light, and you'll see how beneficial that is in this situation. So with that in mind, what better place to start than the protagonist? Ah, the player character, the point of view, the leader in all these trials. And that's all they really have going for them, frankly. FANGAN protagonists should, like all good protagonists,
be as bland and generic as possible, since their purpose is to be a vessel for the players to project onto, rather than a character in their own right. How else can the audience possibly enjoy their time in a world full of zany, colorful characters, unless they're playing as Gene Eric Everyman? Of course, while they have basically nothing interesting going on in their lives, they can often balance things out by being friendly, outgoing, and a positive influence in the killing game. Or they can be a cardboard cutout that barely feels like they have a purpose in the plot outside of solving mysteries and occasional shipping fodder. It's really a coin toss which way you may go. Speaking of coin tosses, for a title, the best bet to go with is Ultimate Lucky Student. This is a safe choice as it prevents us from having to make up an entire talent on the spot, and provides a bit of world building in that the school has a policy of selecting one ordinary person in these classes via yearly lottery. After all, earning a place at the most prestigious school in the world, thanks to them just pulling your name out of a hat, is the best way to showcase someone's competence and skills, especially in a murder investigation. Now, if we wanted to go with a bit more flavor, we could instead give our protagonist the title of Ultimate Question Marks, possibly with a bit of amnesia on the side. As long as it worked well in the base games, there's no reason we can't copy exactly what they did, no matter how much story context is lost in translation. Most importantly, a protagonist should never express any real opinions of their own, beyond the most average answers you can find on a questionnaire. Of course, Ultimate Question Marks is only an option if that title hasn't already been given to the Rival. Standing completely counter to our protagonist, we have the Rival. Now, more often than not, these are the characters who revel in the killing game environment, and are the ones who stir up trouble the most frequently. This is usually done either through being a cold, calculating manipulator, or by being crazier than a squirrel monkey on crack. More importantly, while the protagonist is blander than beige yogurt, the Rival gets all the interesting characterization, backstory, and revelations in the trials. These usually end up being traits that mirror the protagonist in the most blunt and straightforward way possible. Does the protagonist value hope and friendship? Well, the Rival views those as a weakness, and they're a lone wolf only in it for themselves, ready to sacrifice others at a moment's notice. Does the Rival ever consider that their attitude might end up painting a huge target on their back? What if their cynicism is shown to nearly get them killed by doubting an innocent? Or what if their troublemaking isolates them in a trial? That's not a problem, because the Rival has a power nobody else can truly match: ultimate coolness. See, even if it makes zero sense for anyone to listen to them, or for them to obtain the critical information that turns the tide in the trial, the Rival's ultimate coolness will just let them do whatever they want. Whether it's influencing others to side with them, or solving the plot's biggest mysteries on their own, nothing is off the table. The Rival might even be the reason the characters even have a chance at winning, making the player wonder why the protagonist is even here. And of course, the writer should never actually challenge the Rival in any way, instead justifying their actions with some vague insinuations about a tragic backstory. If that doesn't work, just add some vague romantic subtext to their dynamic with the protagonist and that'll make everything alright. Not too much though, because we need to save some for the support. Now, while the protagonist is the face in the trials, the support typically serves as the deuteragonist and does what their name implies. That is, they do all the heavy lifting and investigating, while the protagonist has to spell it out for everyone else. Now, this can definitely make for a solid dynamic, having a support who provides the information, and the protagonist who pieces it all together. But usually the support is only there to provide answers while everyone else is stuck, like that one overachiever in class. Their detective work should also be as vague as possible, especially if their talent has no connection to investigative work. That way, it isn't too easy for the player to guess what's going on. In addition, while the Rival contrasts the protagonist's friendliness with misanthropy, a support typically contrasts them through stoicism and aloofness. Having them express little emotion and never raise their voice can make up for what little character I bothered to give them. I mean, show that they're stone cold even in the face of certain death. After all, subtle characterization is indistinguishable from no characterization at all. The support also has a good chance of being connected to the actual core of the driving mystery, either personally through some sort of tie such as a family or an organization. This can make for a solid motivation for their drive to put a stop to the game, though too much can once again make the audience wonder why their POV character is the guy who just shares the support's answers with the rest of the class. Better to keep those connections confusing and ambiguous until the end. Also, the support has a solid chance of being the opposite gender to the protagonist, and so inevitably their connection will be based entirely on romantic attraction. Never mind that their decision to trust and cooperate with the protagonist can come from, like, all kinds of sources beyond romance. And if the support is the same gender, well, that's not going to stop the shippers no matter what you try. Sometimes not even in-universe. And who better to commentate on the lives of these characters than the mascot? The most important part of any killing game, much like any corporation or sports team, is their mascot. This tiny creature will, most often, be a robotic plush toy controlled by the mastermind of the game as a way to conceal their identity. A good alternative is an artificial intelligence whose avatar is something equally as marketable. I mean, something that also contrasts with the horror of the situation through the appearance of something cute. An important detail with any mascot character is to entirely copy the design of the original mascot and face of the franchise, Monokuma. A design is a great way to showcase the identity of your fangan, and the best way to do that is to vary it up solely by the creature design and then completely copy everything else about Monokuma, right down to the same obnoxious dollar store Mickey Mouse voice. While you'll see them a lot, the mascot's only purpose is to spout hilarious jokes and serve as the judge for the trials, nothing else. Never mind that a mascot could have their own character and purpose beyond simply being a tool for the mastermind, maybe even with a connection to a character in the game, perhaps? But that requires more work than I'm willing to expend. And we are done! No, really, these are the only characters you should concern yourself with. Despite the huge cast that Danganronpa is known for, and a vast array of possible interactions, these four are really the only ones who get, like, any actual roles in the story. The rest are basically just cannon fodder. Of course, some may want to flex their creativity and add more than just 4 base characters. I can't recommend expending too much work on that, but if you do, you've got a wide variety of archetypes to choose from. Just be careful, as said archetypes tend to have their roles and lifespans baked into them. Also, it's important that one of your characters is secretly a serial killer. Why? How? What purpose does this serve? Well, it happened in the base game, so we've got to throw it in somewhere. It's not as though we can actually do anything with that information, or Kodaka forbid, not do that. Why not make them into comic relief too, since a serial killer not actually being the Blackened during a killing game is funny? Ugh. So now that we have our cast, what's next? Well, since this is a killing game, we need to give them some reasons to want to kill each other, and that brings us to the story. Now, in keeping with our previous workload requirements, designing your story is as simple as following the exact same formula as the main games. In fact, along with including the exact same location, absolutely no thought is necessary when you can do exactly everything the first game did, right down to the same exact motivations, types of deaths, and chapters where said deaths occur. Now, that being said, we can't just completely rip off the canon games. We need to stand out a little bit more and have a clear plan on how these characters interact, what purpose each of them holds in the story, their motivations, aspirations, goals, and which of them survives. And by that I mean we could take some easy shortcuts and just throw things at the wall to see what sticks. As such, the quickest and easiest way for any killing game story to occur is to make the characters as argumentative, cruel, spiteful, annoying, and unlikable as possible. That way, when they die horribly, you feel nothing but joy. I mean, we could use likable characterization and backstory to inform the characters' decisions and highlight the tragedy that led them to commit these crimes, and how these are emotional, traumatized teenagers forced to do these things for the sake of someone else's entertainment. But that sounds way too hard. Better we focus on the brutal deaths and flashy executions. That's what the audience wants, after all, so be sure to give them all the reasons to crave murder. When your audience is so sick of your cast that they're counting down the minutes till the next body discovery, you're doing it right. Of course, there's still plenty of room to include the aforementioned backstories, that being in the free time events where you can spend some time with the characters right before their horrific deaths. Could we actually have the events of their FTEs foreshadow reveals in the plot, or maybe even put the reveals about their backstories into the main plot? Of course not, that would get in the way of the drawn-out conflict and hilarious jokes. Remember that characters should only ever be thought of in terms of gimmicks and death flags, not as actual participants in the story. We can have maybe 1 or 2 that serve as tritagonists, but their role should ultimately be minimal in comparison to the protagonist, rival, and support. But as with any good story, a writer should also be willing to play sleight of hand with the audience and manipulate their emotions at every opportunity. The best and most effective way to do that is to give some hints that one of the characters, potentially one of the most unlikable ones, is undergoing some kind of development and wants to change for the better. Perhaps they're mourning the death of a previous character that they were really close to. A lot of great possibilities with that. And that way, the audience investment returns just long enough to brutally cut the character down. And then they'll be even more excited to see the killer pay for their crime. Does this come off as emotionally manipulative writing? Well, just tell your audience we can't have developed characters around here. How else would we get all those sweet, sweet deaths? Yes, just make it clear to your audience that development is the mark of death. It's not like some of the best character arcs in the series have been given to those who've lost people they cared about or anything. Remember, at no point should a killing game highlight the tragedy of the situation or the goodness in humanity in any way, where people who become friends find strength through one another. Friendships and potential romances only exist to hurt those involved, As the game goes on, the audience should be experiencing these exact same feelings, which has everything to do with investment and nothing to do with the sunk cost fallacy. Besides, it's not as if you need a strong plot or characters to hold up a killing game, you just need strong walls to hold them in. See, one of the most important things to adhere to in copying the exact same plot structure as the canon series is quite literally copying the exact same structure itself. That is, Hopespeak Academy, the time-tested, proven killing game playground. Only tryhards go out of their way to design an entire new setting, be they other schools, laboratories, underwater facilities, or any other out-of-the-way location that might serve as a suitable setting. Now, a writer may take time to consider Hopespeak Academy was modeled after the real-world Tokyo University, which was chosen specifically because it represented the hope of mankind, and its placement in the center of the most populated urban area on the planet added to the ongoing mystery of why no rescue was coming. This is a case of writing the plot around the setting. However, because these assets already exist and are already part of an established setting familiar to the audience, a writer is also free to drop their own cast into the exact same school without any consideration for the same context. Could we utilize the school to tell a unique version of a familiar story? What about connecting the events to the canon series? Should we in any way consider connecting it with the events of the first game at least? Could we maybe set it somewhere else and simply reference Hopespeak Academy? Nope, too much work. Fangan writers should feel free to host so many killing games in the same spot that it turns Hopespeak from an academic meat grinder into an actual meat grinder.
Speaking of ground meat, let's get on with the most important element of the series, the murders and investigations, or as the games call it, deadly life. The time when the characters, and by extension the audience, need to put on their thinking hats and work together. Now, the first and most important rule is that all murders/body discoveries be ridiculously gory and violent, no matter the situation. The goal is to shock and horrify the audience, not to actually connect with the character in question, or provide any hints, clues, or even a vague glimpse into the psyche of the killer. As for the investigations themselves, these should come second to the brutality. Trying to reverse engineer a murder situation from disparate pieces of evidence is, really hard. So the easiest solution is to just have the culprits leave behind really obvious signs of their presence, or to have them do something literally only they're capable of thanks to their talent. Once the characters get over the shock of seeing a friend reduced to a Jackson Pollock painting made of Pepto-Bismol, clues should be scattered all over the place. Of course, these shouldn't be too easy to guess, as the goal of any mystery should be a game of one-upsmanship with the audience, rather than guiding the audience to any sort of conclusion. A writer should make their clues as obtuse and confusing as possible, then spell the answers out for the player and the audience, rather than allowing them to put the pieces together themselves. It's an especially easy way to make characters seem smart and intelligent, rather than making the writer seem more interested in being esoteric. Even if I'm not going to devote even 10% of my creative energy toward the investigation, I can't let anyone feel smarter than me. Better to make the mystery seem so overly complicated that there's no way a high schooler with zero criminal experience could have pulled it off. Even then, the support and rival will just piece it together themselves immediately, and then the protagonist's job is mostly to just help everyone else play catch-up. Even if the protagonist is sure that they've pieced it together, one of those two is bound to pull a new piece of evidence out that completely changes everything. After all, in no way can we deviate from the Japanese court system's surprise reveals, even if we're in a different country. Speaking of the court system, it's time to head to the trial grounds. Now that we've got all our pieces of evidence saved up, it's time to bring them all together, putting everyone's lives on the line as we figure out who the killer is. Of course, we can't stick strictly to the business at hand. Clearly this group discussion that will decide the fates of every single person in this game, where the smallest piece of evidence could prove critical to finding the culprit, will benefit from tangents about penetration, how to pronounce someone's name, or whether or not someone in the group is actually a ghost. I'm sure those will never get old. Could I use these tangents to explore lingering questions or conflicts the characters have? Show how their biases may lead to them making the wrong decisions? Maybe even have them be the ones to point out how mistakes the lead characters are making could spell disaster for everyone. Well, no. We need to save those for the rival and support, as everyone else is just murder fodder that can make do with funny quips that add nothing to the story. It's what some of them would have wanted, I'm sure. But what happens when you zero in on your culprit? Well, a neat and not at all bothersome thing to do is to present all your culprits as evil and or working for evil, while presenting all victims as 100% virtuous without fail. Morality is best when it's viewed entirely as black and white, much like the masterminds behind these games and their animatronic personas. Yes, even if the story did nothing to suggest that the victim was an even remotely decent person, since our story demanded melodrama over characterization, we should deify them in every way and equally demonize the one responsible for their death.
A writer should always remember that variation in creativity should not be necessary. Audiences will get confused if your story doesn't follow the exact same structure as the canon series, so best not to get too out there. The only times when the culprits should ever appear even remotely sympathetic or understandable is when they've done literally nothing wrong. By which I mean, in their attempts to prevent the game, help someone, or literally save someone's life, things went catastrophically wrong and they accidentally killed them instead. What a poor, tragic, unfortunate soul. Anyway, on to the executions.
The best part of any DR game, and the one that all Fangan writers should devote the majority of their creative energy toward. Now that we have our culprits identified, how do we dispose of them? Well, the brutality of each death should be inversely proportional to the likability of the character. That sweet, wholesome character who was the victim of circumstance, they should undergo the most horrifically visceral and drawn-out way to go you can possibly imagine. One of the more unrepentant jerk characters, with no remorse for the pain they've caused, they get a quick, almost completely clean demise. This is necessary for the story and in no way will make your audience bitter. This is especially true if the character who gets executed was tricked or manipulated into committing a murder, and shows complete remorse for their actions, especially if they've undergone seemingly significant character development up until then. Being rendered into a pile of bone dust and bloody confetti will only invest the audience further, and in no way infuriate them at the loss of potential. Remember, in Danganronpa, character development is just Death Flag by any other name. Could the deaths serve as irony, highlighting aspects of these characters? Could these murder plots showcase the culprit's motivation, creativity, and intelligence? Does having someone commit an accidental murder showcase the tragedy of circumstance, or maybe even suggest the mastermind is playing dirty to further their own ends? Please, I can't be bothered with all that. Why devote time and energy to characters who won't matter in the long run? As soon as they're murdered or executed, it's simply better that the story forget they ever existed. It's important that a series that critiques social stratification and elitism does so by reminding the audience that only a select few people really matter in the end. And we are done! Wait, we're not? That can't be right. We've got a bunch of flashy executions. That's all we really need, isn't it? Oh right, how could I forget? We've got our executions, our cast, our murders, the setting, and the death list. What's next? Well, it's time to reveal our mastermind. Now, a good hook for a Fangan is who exactly is orchestrating the situation and why. What are their goals, their plans? How do they have so much info on these people, and why these people in particular? Most importantly, who could they possibly be? Well, you see, there are two primary methods in handling the reveal, and subsequently the nature of the finale. The first is to use a random number generator, because the best kinds of twists are the ones that are so mysterious, even the writer doesn't know them. No forethought or planning should be necessary to put into a reveal, beyond the vague indication that there's some overarching hint that the mastermind is one of the people in the story. Should a writer consider what sorts of methods and motives a mastermind could utilize in driving the killing game, as a means to hint who they are? Could there be some underlying resentment or possibly even respect towards the cast? Even failing that, what could the mastermind's goals and motivations be? Well, simply put, they wanted to make everyone in this game miserable. Really, that's all. Despair was the driving force behind the canon games, thus we can apply it even more bluntly and awkwardly than was done there. Remember that, in the spirit of copy-pasting everything from the canon games, we should do so regardless of the actual themes of the story we've chosen to write. Whoever the mastermind is shouldn't matter, as they'll all basically be written the exact same. A wisecracking, unhinged pseudo-nihilist who sees no value in human life. But they're sure up for some comedy hijinks, especially since the funny characters have all died by now. Usually. The second method is quite literally just using the same mastermind as the games. No, really, when you have a character who is portrayed as an absurdly calculating chess master, might as well save on the hard work and just make her the one behind everything. Above all, remember the mastermind, the one who put together this entire game, is barely a factor in anything up until the very end. The mascot should instead serve as their primary viewpoint and mouthpiece, and no thought should be given as to why the grimdark nihilist thought that a plush toy would be a great way to interact with everybody. All of this still applies even if it turns out that the protagonist themselves was actually the mastermind and just forgot about it. You would think that it would give the story a bit more punch, but really the best means of punching the audience is with overblown speeches about how Hope is actually really good and stuff. Speaking of Hope, am I missing anything else? Oh right, we haven't decided on theme and tone yet. Now, we've already covered all the most important elements of a Fangan, so this should be the easiest, right? It's not as if anyone in the audience really cares about the themes, not when I have flashy executions and epic reveals to tide them over. The canon games at least give us a lot to work with. One of Danganronpa's biggest strengths has been its focus on the nature of social stratification, the exploitation of talented youths, and the horrendous pressures they face as a result. Many of the best characters have had their backstories defined by struggle, and these can make for compelling motivations that may drive people to commit horrible acts in a stressful situation. Perhaps we could provide some resonant examples of this sort of stress for the audience, effectively humanizing the Blackens of every chapter by showcasing both the external pressures that made them turn to murder, and the internal conflicts involved when they realize what they've done. We certainly could do that, but we could do something even better and simply write them all off as evil. After all, the best way to present morally complex themes is to portray anyone who even considers the idea of murder as an irredeemable monster. No matter what their motivations may be, no matter the circumstances, each and every one of them is nothing but a self-serving sociopath who only cares about getting back to their life of talent and privilege. Does this work when the Blackened is meant to be unsympathetic? Of course, which means a writer should feel free to depict every single Blackened as an ever-increasing set of cartoon villains, who were probably internally cheering when they heard the terms of the killing game on day one. Remember that the only way to present a nuanced and complex moral situation exploring human nature is to depict all humans as selfish, cowardly, violent, and generally nasty under a thin exterior of kindness. The lesson should be to never trust anyone, ever, even when your life is literally on the line. Conversely, when the message isn't homo homini lupus, it should be about how friendship and cooperation can overcome anything. This message should be utterly beaten into the audience's head at every opportunity with long-winded speeches about hope. Of course, telling is much easier than showing, and these speeches will in no way be diminished by a lack of support. Our protagonist should blindly adhere to idealism, never considering anyone around them could ever be tempted by the motivations, fear, desperation, or anything whatsoever. Their friendship speeches are so powerful that they completely demolish basic pattern recognition in all who hear them. And despite being betrayed, lied to, exploited, and deceived over and over again, the protagonist should always adhere to this idea, which will in no way make them look stupid and reckless, nor will it reflect poorly on the others for continuously trusting them. Could a writer utilize both these elements to their advantage? Write a cynical protagonist whose views are challenged in the trial for putting themselves and others at risk? Perhaps an idealistic protagonist is wise enough to discuss the situation with his fellow captives, and why they might turn to murder. What about a protagonist who actually has a very dark past and is afraid of being found out, yet still works to protect others? Of course not, don't be silly. Themes are best delivered through empty platitudes about friendship and blind belief, rather than showing teamwork and cooperation actively succeeding in any way. No discussions about human nature or the actual situation at hand, just blind adherence to the idea that people are either utterly saintly or monstrously evil with zero overlap. We can't have deep and meaningful explorations of character like that. We can have plenty of fan service though. Gotta get that completely irrelevant bathing and or beach scene in there somewhere. Also, be sure to make the entire female cast so busty, it's almost enough to question how they aren't completely doubled over in pain. If it has exploitation in its themes, it might as well be close to an exploitation film. It's not as if these games could be used to explore what might drive someone to commit horrifying things in the name of success, or that measuring human life in terms of achievement is actually a really horrible idea. Certainly not because these are very resonant themes in the real world. Could a writer at least consider the implications of a society that lets high schoolers work as doctors, lawyers, and cops? Why does this society feel comfortable with what's essentially glorified child labor? Who are the ones promoting it? Could adults have ultimate titles? Is there a class divide between those who have talents and those who don't? So many possibilities present themselves here. But we need to keep our workload light, and that means simplifying the messages down to hope good, despair bad, and that the only ones responsible for this system are the ones in charge of the school where everyone is imprisoned. If it sounds like a ping-pong back and forth, that's only because that's exactly what your themes should do. Remember that, like most of the cast personalities, themes and tone can be settled on and then dropped on a whim. It's not as if anyone is going to focus on them anyway. Tone, theme, characterization, setting, and story aren't what truly matter in Danganronpa. Casts should only ever be thought of in terms of their order on the death list, and only the barest effort should be made in making them stand out. What truly matters is making the most shocking, goriest deaths and executions possible in an escalating arms race between bad taste and the investment of the audience. No one really plays these games or experiences these stories for anything other than the most brutal deaths imaginable. A writer should guide their audience through meandering investigations and dialogue sections purely with the promise of a horrific death by the end. Rinse and repeat until you have 6 chapters and a guaranteed paycheck on your hands. And a good thing too, because it looks like my time is up.